Hello, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, depending where you are. Welcome to Connect Africa, our daily session where we analyze. Okay, sorry about that for hearing my echo, but yeah, where we analyze issues that impact Africa, whether it's happening in the continent or abroad. So for today, our topic that we selected is a very heated one. The topic runs as what next for Barbados as UK's Black conservative leader calls slavery reparations struggle as a scam. But before that, there is a lot to talk about reparations itself. And for this, none other than Ambassador David Commission is here from Barbados. He's an ambassador to of Barbados to CARICOM. I would do the proper introduction. But first, welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you, Mahlet. It's a pleasure to be back with you on this show.
It's always a pleasure and an honor to have you here. So let me please allow me to introduce my guest here. Ambassador David Commission was born in 1960 in the Caribbean island of St. Vincent. I like this historical aspect. He is the son of traveling Methodist minister of religion, and Ambassador David received his primary education at Tranquility Primary School in Trinidad before attending Harrison College and the University of West Indies in Barbados. Ambassador Commission won a Barbados exhibition in 1979. It's called the Sir Fred Phillips Academic Prize as a faculty of law, again, University of West Indies. Ambassador Commission is a former senator in the government of Barbados and currently Barbados ambassador to Caribbean community, or known as also CARICOM, and also to the Association of Caribbean States. He's also a founder member of the Caribbean Pan-African Network, the Clement Payne Movement of Barbados, the Caribbean chapter of the International Network in Defense of Humanity, and the Global African Congress. He was an architect and the first director of Barbados Government Commission for Pan-African affairs. Since the year 2012, Ambassador Commission has served as a member of Barbados National Task Force on reparations. So now you know why we invited him. He's also the author of The Wide Straits of Tomorrow essays and speeches. It is the healing of nation and the case for reparation and the Pan-African love story of Arnold and Mignon Ford. I recommend everyone really to read that book. I have. Now, again, welcome, Ambassador. So let me go to the question directly. Since 2012, Barbados has been has championed the campaign for reparations and currently we have made by this the UK a new Conservative Party leader, where her name is a Nigerian-born British Kemi Badenoch, where she calls it or described reparation as a scam. Now, where would that lead the whole campaign or advocate for reparation? That is the goal, the aim of this discussion. But before that, I believe that there is a lot to learn about reparation. So let's start with now, what is reparation? What are the crimes that are committed against our ancestors exactly?
Well, the crimes are the most heinous crimes known to international law. A crime against humanity. Uh, this is the, along with genocide, these are the two greatest crimes. So when we look at our history of African enslavement, when we look at what was done to our ancestors over a period of some 350 years, close to 400 years, um, the their enslavement, the terrible punishments that were inflicted on them, the terrible cultural and psychological damage that was inflicted, the very denial of their humanity, the fact that for multiple generations, um, they never got to keep or appropriate the fruits of their labor. You know, when we look at that whole history, what we see is one monumental crime against humanity. And international law tells us where a crime against humanity is committed, that there's a remedy for that crime. And that remedy is reparations or compensation. And the whole idea is that reparations, where there's a crime, damage, that crime has caused damage, reparations is designed to counteract that damage, to put the party back in the situation they would have been in if the crime had never been committed. And you know, one way of looking at this, I mean, there's several ways in which we could look at this, but one way of looking at it is when the Europeans first went to the west and east coast of Africa in the 15th century, they found societies, nations, polities on the west and east coast of Africa that were equal in terms of their material stature and well being to those of Western Europe. However, after 400 years of European imposed enslavement, colonization, theft of Africa's human and natural resources, we have gone from that position of equality to a position of great inequality, where so much of the wealth is to be found in Europe and so much of the poverty and underdevelopment is to be found in Africa and other black nations. So reparations is about curing, healing, repairing that damage and bringing us back to some acceptable level of equality between our societies and nations. That's one way of looking at it.
Now, one of the arguments that come now, mostly I hear it from the UK side, is that when actually it was Tony Blair himself who said that when slavery was committed, it was legal. So, as much as reparation is supported by international law, for UK, it is also when they operated it that they're saying it is legal. Now it's kind of deadlock for an outsiders who see it from like that. So where does this take us? I mean, can we advance it, pushing this through the international law?
Well, we totally deny that chattel enslavement, the kind of slavery that was inflicted on our ancestors, the worst kind of slavery, chattel slavery, where their very humanity was denied, where the most horrible punishments, the mutilations, the branding with hot irons, the whippings, the executions, where terrorism was really inflicted on them, that there's no way that that was legal either under international law or indeed under the national law of the UK, of Britain, and other European countries. So these Europeans apologists um, play a little game. So they say, oh, there was slavery all over the world. In fact, even Africa had slavery. And so, therefore, slavery was a part of the international legal regime. Not true. What Africa had is what we could, back then, we're talking back then in the 15th, 16th century, Africa, like Europe, had something called servile labor. In Europe, it was known as serfdom.
Mm.
Africa had systems of servile labor that were very similar to European serfdom. It was not slavery like we knew in the Caribbean, chattel European imposed chattel and enslavement. But they play this clever game. So they label Africa's servile labor system here. A person could lose their freedom, could be made to work as part of some polity, but their humanity was never denied. They were not subjected to the kind of brutality that our ancestors were subjected to in the Caribbean. And in fact, they could even become part of the kinship group. And often persons who were subjected to that kind of servile labor, they rose to even great heights in the communities that they found themselves in, totally different from what we experience. So if we look carefully at international law, there is absolutely no doubt that the dehumanizing, terroristic, chattel enslavement that was inflicted on our ancestors was definitely illegal under international law. But I go further. Even under the national law of places like Britain, they say that in Britain, slavery was abolished from as early as 12th century. Slavery was illegal in Britain. And by the 15th, 16th, 17th century in Britain, to enslave a human being was a crime. To mutilate a human being was a crime. To rape a human being was a crime. But what the European colonial legislatures did, they said, these Africans that we have brought to our colonies to make them work on our plantations, we will determine that they're not human beings, that they are wild creatures, that they are things, they are chattels, they have no soul. And therefore, the legal system that we have at home that applies to human beings cannot be applied to them. And therefore, we are at liberty to design a totally new legal system to apply to these savage creatures, these inhuman entities. And so they came up with these slavery codes based on this notion that Africans were not human beings. But of course, no legislative body has the power to transform a human being into something other than a human being. So our ancestors remained human beings. And therefore, if it was a crime in Britain to enslave a human being, to deprive them of their liberty, to rape them, to mutilate them, to brand them with hot irons, then when they did those things to our African ancestors in the Caribbean, they were also doing them to human beings. And so they were committing crimes. So the European states persons of the 21st century who say to you that they don't owe reparations because slavery was illegal back then, what they're saying to you, they're saying, look, we are so morally bankrupt that we subscribe to the notion that Africans were not human beings. That is in effect what they are saying. They are still subscribing to that barbaric, inhumane notion that our ancestors were not human beings. So they are insulting us. In fact, this lady, this Nigerian, I don't know where the African continent manufactures these people. She has hurled a tremendous insult at the African and African descended people of this world when she dares, she has the audacity to say to us that the claim for reparations is a scam. And for that kind of insult to come from a black African Nigerian woman, it is truly, truly disgusting. Um, but it is what it is, and and we will we will deal with that as we go forward and pursue our reparations cause.
Let me continue. Yeah, it's so painful. Let me continue with the teaching, and for us bringing this background, the knowledge with regards to reparation. Most of us take it for granted, but I don't think we really know in detail how many Africans are we talking about in terms of numbers. If there is any research document that has crossed the transatlantic ocean. I mean, we have also people who died on the way, but yeah, are there any numbers?
Well, we have various scholars give you a variety of numbers. So we have numbers ranging from a low of, say, 12 to 15 million who were actually landed in the New World, in the Caribbean and the Americas. And then you add to that those who died along the Middle Passage, those who died on the journey in Africa to the coast, those who died during the slave raiding expeditions. So we have to put all of those numbers together. Then there are other scholars who deny that it was 12 to 15 million who were landed. Some scholars tell you it was as much as 40 million people who were landed in the Caribbean. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, because then you also have to go on to factor in the many generations
Yeah.
of African descended people who were produced in the
Mhm.
Caribbean and the Americas and who lived out their lives in slavery. So I don't have the figure. I don't have the figure at hand, but this is work that scholars have been doing. And recently we had this report from the Brattle Group. This is a group of specialist economists who were commissioned to look at the institution of enslavement and to help us work out some actual figures in terms of the compensation that is due as a result of the loss of freedom, the loss of the fruits of our ancestors' labor, all of the punishments and all of the damage inflicted on generation after generation of African people. So I think with a lot of the new research that is now coming forward, that's that's an issue that we will have to get clear, perhaps a better and more scientific idea of the number. We will never have the exact number, but a good ballpark figure of the overall number that we are talking about. But I wouldn't want to put a figure out there. If you had alerted me, I would have gone and perhaps done some research.
Perhaps you can tell us the one for Barbados, because that I come across with the numbers and I have listened
Yeah,
to your presentation, but
yes.
that
Well,
doesn't mean the whole
somewhere
thing.
in excess of 600,000 people. When we look at Barbados, those who were landed, those um, who were birthed in Barbados, who were born in Barbados, who lived out their lives in enslavement. We are looking at well over 600,000 people, and Barbados is just one of several Caribbean colonies, not to talk of massive countries like Brazil and the United States of America.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now, One of the countries, I dare to say the only country or island is Barbados, who is pushing this campaign for reparations. And is there any, historical account that why Barbados? It's a good thing that we found at least one country pushing for that, but what is it really that makes Barbados to carry this big responsibility that should have been distributed amongst all the black people to the continent? What is that historical account, that Barbados might have experienced it differently or something?
Well, first of all, I would say that Barbados is part of the Caribbean community, which is a grouping of 15 full member states and 6 associate member states. But within, so CARICOM, we have a CARICOM reparations campaign. It's a collective campaign. All of us are in it together. But Barbados has lead responsibility for it. So we have a CARICOM Prime Ministerial Committee that is in charge of the reparations campaign, and the Prime Minister of Barbados is the chair of the CARICOM Prime Ministerial Subcommittee. And we also have a CARICOM Reparations Commission that does a lot of the legwork on reparations. And once again, a Barbadian in the form of Sir Hilary Beckles, who is also the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies. He is the chair. So it is true to say that Barbados does play, a very significant leadership role of the CARICOM reparations process. And I think, I would say if I were to have to account for that, well, the first point I would make is that number one, Barbados was the world's first out and out slave society. All right. I'm not saying that Barbados was the first society that had slavery, because many societies before Barbados had slavery. But Barbados was the first society that was built completely around the institution of slavery. And so from early on, from the 1660s in Barbados, the enslaved component of our population was the majority. So we had a majority enslaved component of the population. The entire economic system of Barbados, that sugar plantation culture, the social system, the governing ideology of the country, everything was centered on the institution of slavery. And it was the Barbadian slave master class that committed that outrage of determining, purporting to determine that Africans were not human beings and that they were at liberty to develop a totally new legal regime to apply to Africans. And so the Barbados Slavery Code of 1661, that was when this notion of Africans not being human beings was quote unquote institutionalized in law. And that slavery code became the model that was passed on to Jamaica, to South Carolina, to the American colonies, and so forth. So Barbados has that notorious, not Barbados, the white slave master class of Barbados has that notorious historical record. And then the other point I would make is that the modern reparations campaign really has its roots, I believe, in the 2001 United Nations World Conference Against Racism. This is where reparations came very firmly onto the United Nations international policy agenda. And it is true to say that Barbados played a very big role in that UN World Conference Against Racism. Barbados was deeply involved in the UN World Conference Against Racism, and Barbados Barbados concentrated in really pushing the reparations cause during that whole Durban World Conference process. And so it was kind of natural that by 2012, Barbados, the government of Barbados took the decision to establish a national task force to pursue reparations. So our national task force was actually set up a year before CARICOM decided in 2013 to establish this CARICOM campaign. And truth be told, it was really the Barbados National Task Force on Reparations that advanced the idea of establishing a CARICOM campaign, of establishing a CARICOM reparations commission. So we crafted the idea. It was ultimately piloted at CARICOM by Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And Sir Hilary Beckles also played a big role in getting that CARICOM campaign established in 2013. So that's the history. You're muted, Mahlet. Still muted.
Yes. Okay. No, thank you for that. So now we see. So they did that, the slave masters, because the Brit at that time in UK they have already this national law that made slavery illegal, right? So they were kind of.
Yeah, that's in fact when the white slave master Barbados House of Assembly was developing its slavery code, one of the things it said, look, when we look at the mother country, England, we can find nothing in the laws of England about slavery, nothing in the laws to guide us, to tell us what to do, how to structure the system of slavery. And the reason why there was nothing in the British laws is because slavery had long been abolished. So they said, since we can find nothing in the laws of England, we are at liberty to design a totally new legal regime, which again, they were not at liberty to do that either, because the colonial House of Assembly, it was a rule that the colonial House of Assembly could not create any laws that contradicted the laws of the mother country. But this is exactly what they did, and they all went along with it, including the British government, including the British monarchy, because slavery was making money for them. They had become enticed by the tremendous profits that were emerging from the plantation economy of Barbados. In 1700, Mahlet, little Barbados is 166 square miles, but Barbados had become the center of the sugar revolution, this new industry. Europeans had never tasted sugar before. So when Barbados, developed this tremendous sugar industry, and it was like a narcotic drug. It is like what an illegal narcotic drug is today, and it attracted tremendous profits, so that little Barbados, in the late around about the year 1700, was more valuable to Britain than New York, Pennsylvania, New England, four of the American states combined. right? In terms of trade, in terms of the profit that they were extracting. So they were seduced. They were seduced by money. They were seduced by the wealth that was being generated. And of course, all of this wealth and money was dependent on an African slave labor because that plantation economy, that sugar plantation economy could not be run unless you had large inputs of enslaved labor from Africa. And so they went with the crime and they excused the crime and they accommodated it and they all profited from it. They were all guilty of that unjust enrichment at the expense of the underdevelopment of the African continent and the tremendous crimes committed against our people in the Americas.
Well, so finally, when slavery was abolished, so the British said, okay, they have they have to compensate someone, and they have had these options. And please walk us through that, what they did.
Well, the British were so fixated on the concept that our ancestors were not human beings, that they were pieces of property, that even when they came to legislate the abolition of slavery, the only way in which they could think of doing it was to say, look, these white slave owners are going to be losing pieces of property. And therefore, we have to value these pieces of property. We have to work out what is the commercial value of these pieces of property that they will be losing as our ancestors gain their freedom. And we have to compensate them for their loss of property. So it never occurred to them that human beings who had been deprived of the fruits of their labor were being freed, and that they, as human beings, were entitled compensation for all that they had gone through, all of the deprivations that they had experienced. That never occurred to them. They could only see pieces of property. And these slave owners were losing their pieces of property. So what did they do? Well, they looked at the generation of enslaved persons that existed in the British Empire in 1833 when they were about to abolish slavery. And they said they did a calculation. What is the labor value of these pieces of property? And they arrived at a figure of 47 million pounds. 47 million pounds in 1833 is equivalent to something like 170 billion pounds today in today's values. And they said, look, what we will do, we will give the slave owners 20 million of those 47 million pounds, we will give them 20 million pounds in cash. And the other 27 million pounds that we owe to them, even though we are freeing these Africans, these black people, we will require them over the first 6 years of their quote unquote freedom to provide a number to work free of cost, to continue to work free of cost for a certain number of hours every week on the plantation so that they could work off the next 27 million pounds. So that was the basis upon which the emancipation took place. It was at that point that our ancestors should have been paid reparations. Instead, they paid the reparations to the slave master. And that 20 million pounds in cash, that represented something like almost, I think something like 60% of the British national budget, annual budget of the time. It was a massive figure. And therefore, they had to take loans and they had to issue bonds to be able to pay that 20 million pounds, either 40% or 60% of their national annual budget. And it took the British government close to 200 years to pay off those slavery compensation bonds. They only finally paid them off in 2015. So the British government had no problem from 1833 to 2015 financing compensation for slave owners. Yet, this Mrs. Badenoch has the audacity to say that African people whose ancestors were enslaved, who worked generation after generation, never getting to keep any of the fruits of their labor, all of the fruits of their labor siphoned off to white families, white companies, to the capitals of Europe. And then you have the audacity to say that even to assert that some compensation, some reparation is due to your people, that is a scam? I mean, it is so ludicrous. And what makes it worse is that it is coming from the mouth of a Black woman.
Whose ancestors were, the woman ironed the name of the slave masters on their breasts. But again, she's a good product of what do you call capitalism or imperialism. She's a good harvest, I believe, for Britain. They made her the way they want to make her.
But Mahlet, I kind of, there's a way in which we could also see her as a victim. That mentality that is so alienated from yourself, from your own people, from your history, that you, in a sense, you could say, well, this is a war has been waged against Black and African people for hundreds of years now. And many of us have been damaged by that war. And a person who is so alienated from their people and their selves, you could argue that this person is a victim of that war. That what you are seeing is a person is a victim of 400 years of a very hostile assault on Black and African people. So in a sense, that's one way of looking at her as well, of understanding that this is a symptom of that war. Anyhow, let's leave her alone for now.
No, but that also brings us to the next question. Now, given that this UK's Black conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, her dismissal of reparations as a scam, do you see this a moment of betrayal, to say the least, for Barbados, or is it an opportunity to reassess perhaps strategies, the way to go for reparations? And does the UK leadership, led by, again, this Black woman from Nigeria, who opposes reparations and calls it a scam, make it more difficult for Barbados to push for reparatory justice? Or could it serve as as a rallying point of broader international support? How do you see it?
Well, she is merely the leader of an opposition party. So she is not in government. She will not determine government policy. But truth be told, the British government has been consistent over the years. I mean, in 2001, at the World Conference Against Racism, the position of the British government was that they don't owe reparations because slavery was illegal, you know. So they have maintained that morally bankrupt position up to today. So in a sense, nothing really has changed. this this song that slavery was illegal, that, which is based, as I said, on the notion that Africans are not human beings. They have been consistent in maintaining this, even when, as I said, even when they came to abolish slavery, they maintained that principle that Africans were mere pieces of property. So nothing has changed. But what has changed is that there have been several European and British institutions and families that have had the moral conscience to say, we did wrong. We are implicated in criminality. Much of the wealth and the fortune that our family, that our company, our university, our institution enjoys today comes out of those crimes of African enslavement. We apologize and we want to make some form of compensation. So we have been hearing that. Sometimes not in the most satisfactory way, but whether it's the Church of England, whether it's the Bank of England, whether it is families like the Trevelyan family, the Gladstone family, we have had examples of European institutions and families exhibiting some level of moral conscience and decency. And so I think that it is perhaps only a matter of time before a government, how long can a government stand separate from an increasing elements of its society that are demonstrating some moral conscience. So I think in the long term, of course, I think it is inevitable that we will bring these governments to the reparations negotiating table. But we have to up the ante of our reparations campaign. You know, right now, we are doing a lot of work in terms of public education. We are trying to get the information out there about the history. We are also trying to educate not just Black people, but also allies within these European societies. But I think the time has come where we now need to go more seriously into a strategy of international diplomacy and what I would call legal guerrilla warfare. I think the time has come where we need to make much more use of the United Nations General Assembly. We need to make much more use of all of the relevant United Nations treaties and conventions, such as the International Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. There are several UN treaty bodies that we could use to, to bring this question of reparations before the treaty body, to get the treaty body to examine it and to pronounce upon it. There are also ways in which we could use the treaty bodies to actually get a case before the International Court of Justice. In addition, we could use the UN General Assembly to have reparations debated at the UN General Assembly, to pass a resolution mandating the International Court of Justice to issue an advisory opinion on reparations. An advisory opinion would not be binding, but it would be highly persuasive. So I am saying that we are not daunted in any way by the mouthings of Miss Badenoch. You know, I mean, we don't take that seriously. That's what they have been chatting now for hundreds of years. So there's nothing new about that.
Except that now they put black face on it.
Yeah, they put a black face on. But anyhow,
that's a strategy. Also, when they want to bring these African heads of states to ICC, you know, they bring those black faces in the ICC, the judge, and I mean, same old strategy that we are seeing. But you raised, you kind of touched what I wanted to ask you. So now the whereabout of this reparation campaign, what are you doing now? So you touched on, and one of the things you said is that, you know, to educate, I don't know which part of the society, or if there is an age section, education in elementary, I mean, in school for children, or is it just a general awareness for the public? But with that, I would like also to raise, you know, this Kemi Badenoch, you know, because they know that education is powerful. Look, I will just read this from from Reuters. She has described calls for reparation for slavery, which advocates say are crucial to overcome racial discrimination today, as a scam. And she also has opposed the teaching in schools of critical race theory, an academic concept that rests on the premise that racial bias is baked into Western institutions. So that might be the case for the UK, but in Barbados, from where you are you trying to teach it for the children? What are your mechanisms, and who is, you know, responsible? Yes, I know that you are in the committee, and Barbados is leading on behalf of CARICOM. If you can tell us also, as much as I try to ignore it, but it's bugging me, where is the African Union in all this? And is it something like by that, what is the name of Bratton Group or something group in America? So is it lawyers that are, you know, that are in front in this case? Why it is taking us so much? Look at now, you know, how they brought, led by South Africa and others, what's his name, Bibi Netanyahu, and others, the Hamas leader, in short period to ICC. I know that our case might not be related to ICC, but they were so pushing. So what makes ours slow? Because you don't get support from other parts of the, from the continent itself. Why? Yeah, why is this?
You have raised so many issues there.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, first of all, let me try to clarify the International Court of Justice. Let me deal with the UK, because I know the UK better than I know the other European countries. When the UK signed on to the International Court of Justice, they made a reservation in their signing on to the jurisdiction of the court. And the reservation says that only matters that come on stream after, I think it's 1972, will they accept the jurisdiction of the court? So they're saying anything that goes into the colonial period, they're not accepting the jurisdiction of the court. And in any event, any matter pertaining to a former Commonwealth country, that is the countries that they colonized, they do not accept the jurisdiction of the court. So that's the problem. You see, so because of that reservation, we cannot use the court to bring a substantive case for reparations against the UK government. You see, that's the problem. However, that reservation would not apply to an advisory opinion, nor would that reservation apply if we could so astutely bring a dispute before the committee of the International Convention for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So there is a possibility that going through that treaty process, we could get a case before the ICJ. But suffice it to say that these European powers very cleverly, when they accepted the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice, they were very clever to limit that jurisdiction to exclude their colonial past and all the crimes that they committed during the colonial era. So that complicates it, and that's why I said we would have to engage in a legal guerrilla warfare strategy. So we have to bring together our lawyers, our diplomats, and we have to put our brains to work, see how we can best use the system of international diplomacy and the international legal structures, right? Now, Africa is going to be very important for this process because Africa has what CARICOM does not have. Africa has size and weight. Africa is 1.4 billion people. Africa is 55 nation states, 55 members of the United Nations, no less. Now, Africa recently, the African Union did pass a resolution committing to pursuing reparations in partnership with CARICOM. And there was a very important conference in Accra, Ghana last year, I think October or November last year, the Accra Reparations Conference. I attended, and it was my hope that at that conference, we would have made some concrete plans and strategies for Africa and the Caribbean to work together to move forward. But it became clear to me at that conference that Africa was still in the phase of putting its reparation structures in place. So CARICOM is a bit ahead of Africa because we started with our reparations campaign in 2013. So we have had over a decade of it now. So Africa is still putting that structure in place. So I guess we have to be a little patient. But the whole idea is that Africa and the Caribbean are going to work together in tandem on this reparations issue. So yes, the education is very important. I mean, we have to educate our own African and Black people first of all, because reparations has to be a mass movement among us. Reparations cannot be a movement just for academics or governments. It has to be a people's movement that the masses of our African and Afro-Caribbean people are locked into, and that requires education, mass public education. So we set up these national task forces in every CARICOM member state, and that's the job of the task force. The task force is supposed to engage in education at the national level. We also need to get reparations onto the school curriculum. I was actually a member of a Barbadian committee that developed a history curriculum for primary schools. And the very last item that we put on that curriculum that the student would learn just as he's about to leave primary school to enter secondary school was reparations. But I think it is fair to say we are still struggling to get that new history curriculum rolled out across the system in Barbados. So we still have work to do. But we also have to educate the European population, because a few years ago, I was invited to go to the British Trade Union Congress, the annual big trade union convention that they have. Trade unionists. You would think the trade unionists are well-informed people. So I addressed them on slavery and reparations. And I had British trade unionists telling me that what I was telling them was totally new to them, that they had never learned about any of this history in their school system. So these European establishments have been very insistent on keeping their own people ignorant about this history. So, but we do have allies. For example, in our CARICOM reparations movement, we have a very important ally coming out of Ireland. It's a group called the Repair Campaign. And they're Irish people based in Ireland, but they're doing tremendous work in helping to spread the public education in Britain, in the UK, about slavery and about reparations. So we just have to upgrade all of our efforts. You know, what we are doing now, you know, we're on the right path, but we have to take it to a higher and more powerful level.
In terms of number, what are we looking at? For example, when the slavery was abolished, they agreed to pay that, of course, to the slave masters as opposed to the victims, which was around 40 something million dollar at that time, and it's different.
Pounds, 47 million pounds. Yeah.
Okay. So now, what numbers are we looking for to get compensated? And if that becomes successful, is there any mechanism in place as to what goes to what?
Well, bear in mind, when they calculated the labor value, just the labor value, they calculated the labor value of that one generation of enslaved African people in 1833. They came to a figure that is the equivalent of about 170 billion pounds in today's value.
Okay.
But that was just for one generation. There were multiple generations who were enslaved, you know, in the New World. So you would have to multiply that figure several times over. And then that was just the labor value. That was not compensation for the loss of liberty. That was not compensation for all of the punishments, the brutality, the rapes, the whippings. That was not compensation for all the cultural and psychological damage inflicted. That didn't factor in the unjust enrichment that Europe benefited from. So we are really talking about a mass. When you compensate for all of those factors, we are really talking about a very massive figure. And this is where the exercise done by the Brattle Group is important. So I have looked at their report, but I focus specifically on Barbados. Mm-hmm. And they're saying to us that when they do all the compensation for all of the harm, all of the injury, all of the losses inflicted on those over 600,000 African people who are associated with the experience in Barbados, and then in order to bring it up to modern day values, they apply an interest rate of 2.1%, and they arrive at a figure of close to 5 trillion United States dollars. So Barbados alone is owed close to 5 trillion United States dollars. Now, so this is helpful. It is helpful to know that this is the magnitude of the damage that was done. This is the magnitude of the compensation that is really and truly owed. Mm-hmm. But our approach in CARICOM is to say, look, we are not just focused on a money payment. we are focused on development. We are focused on going through a process, as I indicated, where we bring these societies back into some balance. In other words, reparations is about um, putting the victim back into the position he or she would have been in if the crime had not been committed. So how do we restore some kind of equilibrium, some kind of balance between the societies and nations in the Caribbean, for example, and the societies of Western Europe, right? So we are thinking of, while we are grateful for the Brattle calculation to give us that overarching idea of what is really due to us, within the context of that, we are thinking of a developmental compact that will be rolled out over multiple generations. Because we do not think that you can, with one single effort, do justice. So we are the same way, the British government took close to 200 years to pay off the compensation that they agreed to pay to the slave owners. We are saying we need to structure a development-based reparations campaign that will be rolled out over multiple generations. So we start with a series of projects now. In another 30 years, we may have to do part two. We have to refresh those projects and so forth. So these are things that we have to work out. We have to do our own work, our own calculations. But there will come a time when we bring them to the negotiating table, where we sit down and we thrash out what that reparations compact will look like. Of course, part of it will have to be cash payments, but part of it will also be developmental programs. So we're going to have to work out the specifics. But our thinking is that let us start thinking not just of like one silver bullet, but let us start thinking of a multi-generational program that brings our societies back into some equilibrium with Western Europe.
Realistically speaking, Ambassador, is there any hope that this will happen?
It has to happen. Well, I often say to the European diplomats that I come into contact with, I said, look, you all have a choice to make. You have a choice. What kind of future relationship do you want with the black and brown peoples and nations of this world? Do you want a future relationship that is based on mutual respect, on cooperation, on sharing, or shared development? Or do you want a future relationship that is based on acrimony, bitterness, resentment? You have to decide, because our people's eyes are opened up. We know about the history. Our people know about the history. We know about the great injustice that was done, the great crimes that were committed. We know the extent to which you profited from those crimes and the extent to which we were disadvantaged by those crimes. We know it, and you know it, and we know that you know it. And so if you now say to us, in light of all of that history that we all know so well, you now say to us, we owe you nothing. We have nothing for you. you are going to create a future of bitterness and resentment and division. So it's up to you. We, for our part, we understand that the historical facts are on our side. The, the moral principles are on our side. The law is on our side. Righteousness is on our side. And we simply have to stay the course. We have a cause that is just, that is righteous, that is well founded in law, and we simply have to pursue it. No compromise. We are going to pursue it, and we will see. We will see how Europe ultimately responds. But I say to you once again that we are seeing with every passing month, we are seeing more and more European institutions, companies, families acknowledging that history, acknowledging the legitimacy of our claim. And so yes, the governments are the holdout, but can those governments hold out indefinitely? And particularly when we bring Africa and the Caribbean together, they all want to benefit from Africa's resources.
Yeah.
You know? So when we up the ante, when we take it to the UN, when we bring on board as allies Asia, Latin America, when we mobilize the 55 nations of Africa and the 15 of the Caribbean, when we reach a stage where wherever in the world these European governmental representatives go, people, government officials and people are asking them, but what about your debt to the African and African descended people of the world? So let us think of the anti-apartheid struggle. Let us think of South Africa and that anti-apartheid struggle. How did we break down that racist regime in South Africa? Yeah. South Africa and Rhodesia, they said that white supremacy would rule for 1,000 years. But we broke them down. How did we break them down? Well, we crafted an international mass movement that had important allies even among the European populations and so forth. So I think that is the confidence we must have. We must have a certain confidence in the righteousness and justice of our cause, and we must pursue it. And I will tell you that even in simply pursuing the cause, learning our history, coming together as an African family, making those links across the Atlantic from the Caribbean to the continent of Africa to the Africa diaspora communities, we are doing something good for ourselves. We are building our own internal strength as a global African family, and we must have confidence in that process. We will only get stronger and stronger, and ultimately, I am confident that we will prevail.
Thank you, Ambassador. I honestly, I needed that to hear it for myself, even so that it can motivate me. So, finally, what can platforms like Connect Africa can do to join now this plan to make this campaign for reparation international? What can we do? What can I do?
Well, you're already doing it. Now my voice through your platform, my voice and my views are going to reach thousands and thousands of people that otherwise I could not reach. Um, so I thank you for what you are already doing. I attended a meeting of the CARICOM Reparations Commission last week Friday, and I made the case very strongly that we now need to up our game, particularly in the spheres of international diplomacy and the legal struggle. So it is my hope and expectation that very soon from now you're going to see some new signals coming both from the Caribbean and from the continent of Africa, because I believe that Africa is on its way. It's just that the Africa, it's strange. Africa actually led the rest of us in reparations way back in the early 1990s with Chief Moshood Abiola from Nigeria, and the Abuja Conference on Reparations, the Abuja Proclamation on Reparations, the OAU. But unfortunately, when the OAU became defunct, all of those structures also became defunct. So Africa is trying to do a little catch up now. But I think Africa is coming, and Africa and the Caribbean together, and I say Africa and the Caribbean because we are independent nation states. We have governments, we have ambassadors at the UN and seats and so forth. But we also have our brothers and sisters in the diaspora in countries where they may be a racial minority. They don't have their own government and their own ambassador and so forth. But we must create a movement that brings all of brings all of us together. But we would expect the nation states of Africa and the Caribbean really to lead the way, especially if we are talking international diplomacy and international law. So it is my hope and expectation, Mahlet, that soon from now you're going to hear some new initiatives coming from both the Caribbean and Africa that would give your platform even more even more fuel to run with. But I think you are already doing a wonderful job. I think the last interview I did with you, when I look at the numbers of people that I reached, it was tremendous. So please, keep on doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Even if it's a small platform, but I do my best, and it's something also personal for me. I do raise a children that has also a father from Caribbean and also mother from Ethiopia, and yeah, it's. I'm responsible to do something to teach my children that at least I did something to create awareness, and also on that journey they know who they are. And being in Europe, it's hard. It's hard what they get in school and everything. So as I learn, also I try to teach them, and with this platform also my audience here. I know that I took more than an hour, but Child of God, he is here in the chat section, and I think all of your comments are the same, but I will bring only one to the attention of the ambassador, where you said there are so he's from the United States and he's black. I say he, or it could be she as well. It just say Child of God's name. There is, so in the comment says there are Caribbean people in the United States saying that native black people in the US should not receive reparations. So the rest of the chats by this person are all about divisions between Caribbean and native black people. I don't even know what's the difference of it, but yeah, do you know anything about it? So he really wants me to bring to your attention.
No, we don't recognize any separation, any distinction. Slavery was an all encompassing system. it roped in all of us. You know, the slave colonies in the Caribbean could not have existed if they were not provisioned from the United States of America. So it was an internationally interconnected system of oppression and exploitation of African people, and so all of us have an equal stake in reparations, and the reparations movement must be a movement that unites all African people of global Africa. So I can tell this viewer that we in the Caribbean do not recognize any separation, any distinction, and our reparations cause
That's
reaches out reaches out to our brothers and sisters in the United States of America, our brothers and sisters on the African continent, right across the diaspora. And in any event, we are building these relationships. You heard Mahlet speak about her Caribbean husband, Mahlet.
yeah, yes, from
And,
Aruba.
and I can speak about my Ghanaian wife, you know.
Yeah.
So even at that level of our families, we are rebuilding the bonds and the connections. So I can assure this brother or sister that we don't think like that in the we do not think like that in the Caribbean. No, and our African consciousness is growing year by year. You know, we are establishing embassies on the continent of Africa. We are having access to Ghanaian nurses to help us in our public health system here in Barbados. We just brought the African Export Import Bank to the Caribbean to set up their headquarters in Barbados. And so, no. We don't want that kind of backward thinking at all. And we do not subscribe to any such backward thinking in the Caribbean.
All right, then. So, no, that's a good answer. Finally, is there any a website or something that I can post here if people want to learn, what's happening now with reparation, where they can read or something? I know that we can Google as well, but if there's an official platform then that I can share.
Yeah, the CARICOM Reparations Commission, that's the official website for the CARICOM reparations campaign. So I don't have the name at hand, but you do a Google search for the CARICOM, the website of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, and that's where you'll find our information.
Okay.
That's the overarching body for all of our national committees or task forces.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It was really an honor and very informative discussion we had today, and very also, in a way, personal for me, painful. But again, we have to speak about it and get motivated, to do something, to contribute, so that, our generations will not point their fingers at us that we didn't do nothing in terms of, for reparations, and that generational wealth gap will just get broader and broader. So thank you also for the work that you are doing yourself, and then also on behalf of Barbados as well, the CARICOM. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was always a pleasure speaking with you, engaging with you. And my only one question for you is, when are you coming to visit us in the Republic of Barbados? I hope you do make it next year, because next year is our year of return, similar to Ghana in 2018, I think it was in Ghana. Next year we call it the year of we gathering, and we are inviting all of our brothers and sisters to come and spend some time with us. And And yes, and when you get here, we will have some good brainstorming on reparations and how we can make our movement even
I
stronger.
would love to be in Caribbean. I mean, being in Barbados is for me also to be in general in Caribbean. And I would, I look forward to it. So that is the year 2025. Yeah, we
Let's make it
gathering.
happen. Let's make it happen.
Yeah, no, I would love to. And also the art thing is happening in August.
The CariFesta, the Caribbean, the premier Caribbean Festival of Arts is in Barbados in August. That's where all of the countries will be sending their national contingents of artists, performing artists, visual artists, the literary artists to Barbados for a 10-day festival.
Okay, to be continued. Let's end it. And I have a question for this. But thank you all for tuning in, for commenting here. Thank you so much. And please, yeah, go ahead and put your question. And if you have any comment related to also to Ambassador Commission's, respond to our questions, we will forward it to him. And share the video with others. Do not keep information and knowledge only to yourself. You have to share it. That's all I can say. And we will see you on the next one. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.